Cycle has emerged. It started with that mini speaker that I turned into a PC, where a company sends me something random. I do not review it because I'm not a review channel, but I build something cool with it, which gets views, which gets more things. This is important because a lot of videos only make like 20 bucks. So this lets me do more videos without spending tons of money on tools and materials. And this project here, this custom keyboard with this great thonky sound, sounds great. It's the second project to follow that pattern. So today I'm going to walk you through the build and what I learned about switches, keycaps, everything while I did this. So the base of this project is the Let's Split Rev 2, which I used in my very first Cyberdeck build. And that keyboard looked super cool, but it just felt scratchy. It didn't sound particularly great. And I also really missed having a numpad. I started by pulling it all down to the PCB. And the base PCB is something that I could have just bought for like 15 bucks. So if I initially knew that I was going to replace everything, switches, keycaps, everything, I probably should have just bought a new PCB and started from scratch. But I didn't realize how far this rabbit hole would go. I started with the default linear switches that came with the board. I took them all apart. I individually lubricated each one, and they did sound a little better after this, but they still didn't feel great, and I just decided to get new switches. So after some Googling, I went with the Gateron Oil Kings. Whoever named that, no. Name aside, they do sound a lot better. But because they're so expensive, I only got them for the main keys, and for the lower like function keys, I actually ripped the gold pink switches out of the function row of my wormhole keyboard. Which, by the way, that wormhole keyboard was what started this entire descent into spending dozens of hours making a keyboard. Next up, I needed keycaps, and initially I thought just buy ones that look cool, but nope, this was a rabbit hole. Two things seem to matter here, the plastic type and then the keycap profile. For the keycap profile, the taller the key and the thicker the plastic, the deeper the sound. So something like the SA profile has a really thonky sound, but I wasn't ready to commit to that tall of a key, which is very different from what I'm used to. So I kind of went with the next tallest keycap profile, which is the MT3 profile. Kind of a modern middle ground with retro looks, good depth, but a bit more usable than the really tall SA profile. So next, the material. There's ABS and there's PDT. PDT is a little bit more expensive. Some people say it sounds better and like deeper, but I listened to a bunch of sound comparisons, and in the end, I think the PDT material has a more muted tone, but not necessarily a deeper tone. So I went with ABS, got these cyberpunk style keycaps, and oh boy, they do make a difference. Listen to this. My next step was to flash the microprocessor. Here I used the QMK flash tool, found the default .hex file on GitHub, shorted the reset pin on the board, and then just selected flash on the flash tool. As this is only a 40% keyboard, these lower and rise keys are used to swap between my different layers where the symbols and stuff are stored. All right, so then I had a working board, but now I needed a case. I opened up Fusion 360, which is free for hobby use, and I designed the case. Each board is angled 5 degrees like in pitch, because this keycap profile is actually designed for 5 to 7 degree pitch angle. There's also a 5-degree angle like in the yaw direction, and then like another like 3 to 4 degree angle in the roll direction, which just gives it kind of an ergonomic wrist placement. I also added this little additional area here for the macro keypad / thumb pad, and I designed this based off of an Adafruit tutorial. I'll link that tutorial below. It was designed for a full-size macro keyboard. Obviously this is small, so I designed my own PCB in fritzing. Also, shout out to PCBWay for working with me. I'm making a video with them turning this phone into an Android phone. So I'll talk more about the process of learning how to design custom PCBs in that video, but the process of like putting something together in fritzing and then ordering it on PCBWay was a pretty seamless experience, even for a total novice. I cut the Raspberry Pi Pico down to size, soldered it on, and then for the programming, I'm just going to defer to the tutorial I mentioned earlier, which uses CircuitPython. So the nice thing about this method is that the Raspberry Pi Pico actually shows up as a little external storage drive when you plug it into the computer, and in that drive there is the code.python, which you can just open up and quick change the macro keys to whatever you want. Right now, this is F2. so I can rename things. This is equals, and then the rest of it is a numpad. But as I get used to using the layers for my numbers, I'll be able to start to reassign these to other macro functions. And then to print the case that I had just designed, that turns me to this. This is a $230 3D printer. It's the Neptune 3 Pro, and I told them I would use this in a video and share what I thought. That this would not be a full review. They couldn't see the video before I posted it. And again, I'm not a review channel, I'm just sharing my impressions. So some years ago, I got the Mod T 3D printer on Indiegogo for like 400 bucks, and it was a disaster. I also bought a used MakerBot around that same time period. It was also a disaster. So up until I bought the Mars 3 resin printer, I stayed like way far away from cheap budget printers because they had always just, they worked, but they took so much fiddling and fine tuning and stuff to get them to do good prints that just wasn't worth my time. So in getting this set up, I got a few thoughts. Setup was pretty easy. There was one cable that was kind of blocking a bolt that you had to install. And then this like filament detection sensor is attached in a really janky way. And then there's a message on the touchscreen that gets cut off and it makes it sound like it's telling you to lick the nozzle, which I found amusing. Other than those quirks, fit and finish looks a little better actually than my Prussia. And I did zero manual tuning for this. I immediately started a 17-hour print. Go big or go home. And you know what? It handled it like a champ. Both sides came out looking as nice as they do on my Prussia, which is all I can ask for. So would I recommend this? I don't know. I've only done 2 prints with it, so how can I know? But I will say that the setup process with its auto bed leveling and that stuff is way better than a lot of the other like $200 to $250 budget 3D printers. Anyway, back to the keyboard. So I adhere the 2 sides together with JB Weld and then alternate between coats of white paint and like light sanding. And I was inspired by Hippotech, who puts like random things in keyboards to make them have a better sound, like Play-Doh, he tapes the back of the PCB, all sorts of things. I was inspired by him to try something weird too. So I did something that I don't know if other people have done, but I used removable mounting putty and pressed that on the back of the PCB. Here's a quick sound test. I do think that it made a difference. To install the PCB into the case, I wanted a gasket mount. This gives you like a little bit of give in between the PCB and the rest of the case when you bottom out. It just gives it a slightly softer feel and also a better sound. I used this neoprene material for my truck camper build to like make this gasket mount. I glued it to the bottom and then I used this adhesive tape designed for leather work to attach the keyboard. I've been using this tape to attach my like homemade wallet to the bottom of my phone for like a month now, and it hasn't peeled off, so I think it'll be fine for this application as well. Next, I make a shortened cable to connect the 2 halves, and then this keyboard does have 2 USB ports right now. You can see one is here and one is here, one for the macro pad and one for the regular keyboard. But this is going to be resolved because I'm likely going to be building a cyber deck around this. So these cables will end up going into a hub anyway. So for my use, this is where I'm going to stop with this build. The 3D print files are in the description, and let me leave you with a sound test.